The genesis of the former Australian Building Construction Commission arose, as we know, from the recommendations of the Cole Royal Commission. I notice Mr Cole has entered the foray into the public debate only this week. That commission was established by the Howard Liberal government, supposedly saying that the construction industry was characterised by lawlessness. The minister, in his second reading speech said, and I quote, "It," that is the report, "found consistent evidence that the building site and construction projects in Australia were hotbeds of intimidation, lawlessness, thuggery and violence." That's what it was said then. The minister is happy to repeat the Royal Commissioner's wide-sweeping statements, but what the minister fails to mention, and failed to mention yesterday in his contribution, is that the $60 million Cole Royal Commission, which consisted of 23 volumes, $60 million, referred 31 individuals for prosecution, resulted in how many prosecutions, how many convictions? Not one single criminal prosecution, let alone any finding of guilt. So, more than $60 million of taxpayers' money spent on the Cole Royal Commission, lots of colour and movement, many assertions by Liberal members of Parliament and indeed a Liberal minister, again relied upon this week by the government. But that Royal Commission, with all of that expense, with the use of state powers, with all of those findings, led to not one criminal conviction of a union official or a worker, not one. The reputation of people were destroyed, people were smeared, there were attacks on people's reputations which were never redressed, and yet not one person found guilty in a court of law for a criminal offence. So out of this lawlessness that was supposedly rife, there was not one single criminal prosecution. How is it, Mr Speaker, the Commissioner and the government can rely on the assertion there was consistent evidence, yet that supposed evidence resulted in not one criminal prosecution against a union official or a worker related to the evidence? It would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. Royal Commissions, Mr Speaker, are not courtrooms. The same evidentiary standards do not apply, and hearsay evidence which is not cross-examinable and shouldn't be relied upon in the way in which I believe the Commissioner has relied upon it has been stated as fact. Likewise, the most recent Trade Union Royal Commission has referred to a number of matters for further examination by authorities, somewhere in the region of 93. Let's not forget either the most recent Royal Commissioner, Mr Dyson Heydon, in the view of the opposition, clearly had an apparent conflict of interest. Mr Heydon accepted an invitation to a Liberal Party fundraiser while he was Royal Commissioner. He then sat in judgment of himself, we would argue, because the then Prime Minister chose not to act. And we would say that should not be forgotten when the substance of the report is being considered. Whether the Commissioner was in conflict of interest or not, there was sufficient evidence to show he was willing to help raise money for the government by accepting a fundraiser event while he was Royal Commissioner, and on the face of that, and in particular, given his own words when he was a High Court Justice, that any departure from neutrality or an appearance of neutrality should be sufficient for a person to stand aside. He did not even heed, Mr Speaker, his own words when making the decision to continue. He may, of course, cleared himself, but I would say to you, Mr Speaker, I would say to this place, that in the court of public opinion, the credibility of this Commission was irreparably damaged. The government doesn't like reminding the public and the media of that, but we would argue he made a mistake, a fundamental error, in not standing aside.